Well, good morning. Nice to see so many people here at this early time on the second day of Blender Conference. Welcome to my talk about a million little curves, hair for animals, and how to tame those curves. My name is Kerstin Schmidbauer. I'm a 2D and 3D generalist. I come from a background in IT, but slowly transitioned to art over time because it was my passion. And I've been using Blender as a hobbyist for over 10 years and professionally for about 5 years now. I like making characters a lot, stylized and realistic. That's my personal favorite subject, especially creatures and animals. But I also do a lot of other things in 3D. Lately, with a team of amazing other artists, I founded Critter Crew Animations, and I'm the technical director there, leading the modeling, lighting, post-production, rendering, and the fur department. Here a little bit, a few things from Critter Crew Animations. There we have that character called Greenie. She has fur, and every year I create a new hair groom for her. So that's where I get a lot of experience making stylized characters, and in my free time I make the more realistic animal models. So, hair grooming. It's a little bit like sculpting. It takes a lot of time, you have to trust the process, and you have to iterate a lot over the model. It's not something you can just do in one day. It will take time, it will take experience, and depending on the model you try to make, you have different challenges. For example, if you make a realistic model, the people, even if they are not experienced in anatomy or the animals, know the animals that well, they still will notice if something is off. For a realistic model to really sell it, you have to really get the likeliness of the animal captured. And on a stylized model, well, you cannot really reference from somewhere because there are no green wolves, anthropomorphic wolves. So you still have to avoid the uncanny valley, capture a nice likeliness, and do that all without having a perfect reference for it. So that means even if you do a stylized model, get some references first, like a lot of references. You're probably thinking, yeah, of course, every artist knows that. Get references. But did you also know that red foxes have 46 subtypes of their species? They live almost everywhere on the planet, in cold climate, in hot climate, and depending on where they live and their subspecies, they look very different. When I started my fox model, I didn't know that. I just grabbed all the cool references I could find and ended up with a really weird hybrid. Something was off. It didn't feel right until I realized, well, I mixed up some of those subspecies and what came out of it was not what I wanted. Starting easy, of course, most mammals have that. They change with season. They have a thick coat in the winter and a very thin short coat in the summer, so do foxes. And I would advise against mixing references of short and long coats. As well, they shed, and they look really cool during shedding, or they look really scruffy during shedding. You could use those references too for maybe stylized models, or like a more scrunchy looking bad guy fox. And here we have a nice comparison. just because they might live in the same climate, it does not mean they have the same coat. Like on the left, the fox has a much shorter but thicker winter coat, while the one on the right has really glamorous long fur. On a bigger difference, the Arabian red fox is still a red fox, like the American red fox, but he looks a lot different, like super short fur, gigantic ears, big eyes. Yeah, you really have to make sure to not mix those up, but I think you will not mix those up. But just to get the point across how different the animals can be, not just on a per animal basis, but the whole family is gigantic. This also affects the skull and the ear size, the tail length, the paw size, the colors. So many things can be influenced by the subspecies, and you really have to look for references which are best case from the same animal. On websites like Flickr, there are often albums of people who took photographs in one location, and there you have the best chance to get photos, different angles of the same animal. If you can find those, use them instead of just mix-matching references. Also, those two guys are red foxes. The silver and cross fox is just a color morph of the American red fox, while the Arctic fox and the gray fox is not. The gray fox isn't even a true fox. So, not a good example for making a red fox to take a gray fox. Of course, not always you can find perfect photos, you cannot interact with the animal in real life, but maybe you have access to one of their cousins. Like, for example, a dog, a cat, which maybe take a pet that is friendly, that lets you examine them, look at their fur growth, the direction, how thick is it, all those things which may be hard to see on a photo, especially density might not always be too visible on a photo. Then, I wish we could already start with 3D, but we should do a little bit more with those references than just collecting them. We should also use them. And the best way to do that is to draw over. Like, look at the photo, find all those landmarks. Where does the fur change? Are there some primary shapes you can identify? Like, for example, on the fox, the green part on the neck, and on the front leg, the shoulder, till to the middle of the belly is a straight fur. It's longer than the back. On the back we have that more rough, clumpy fur, and on the tail it even fans out again. Mark down all those things, get those out of the way before you start in 3D, because if you think about those things in 3D while also working on the hair groom, it gets a lot. The sooner you figure out how the animal looks and get it in you, the easier it will be. Also, I like to draw in the fur direction, just to keep it in my mind. Same as on the head, I marked the important landmarks that stand out, made some notes on the direction, and just refer back to that when working on the hair groom. But now, let's go more into the 3D part. How do we even start? What do we need to start the fur? In best case, you have a finished animation-ready model. That means we topologized and clean UVs. The hair curve system binds to the UV space. If you edit the UVs, or also the topology, you will affect the fur groom and might have to edit it and clean it up later. Nice to haves are textures and rigs, but those will not directly affect the hair groom. So if you change the rig or the textures, you don't have to worry about destroying anything you have done before. Now, I will talk a little bit about the general things and then jump into Blender to show it to you. We start with the guides always. The guides will define the overall look. All the child hair will be interpolated, or if you use the simplified, just right next to their guides. That's where they will be calculated and they follow the guides. The guides is what we can affect in the sculpt mode. That's what we can really have artistic influence and post them like we want them. They are also the ones that are affected by the deformation from the rig. The children are just following their guides then. So as long as the guide is doing the right thing, the child will also do that. And as already said, we place them by hand and have full control over them. When we start out, we should start as simple as possible, because hair grooms can get very overwhelming fast. So keep the point count low and the density low, and focus on getting those primary shapes we talked before in the model, before you go into detail and make some, like, oh, I want it to be a bit more wavy there. Keep that for the later parts. It's just like I said before, it's very similar to sculpting. Then, how do we define the density? Well, depends on the animal, of course. But as a general rule, try to keep it even, space the guides evenly, and yeah, like, don't have gaps. Gaps can create bald spots, or the child particles will not move properly in the gaps because the next guide is too far away. Having an even density will make the whole thing work a lot better in deformation. Here a little example of too low, too high, and a good amount of density. Most of the density is, of course, not created by the guides, but by the child. But if it's too low, you have bald spots. You will see the mesh beneath, and especially during deformation, when the mesh is just stretching a bit, those bald spots will grow bigger and bigger. And if the density is too high, the hair will clip on each other and form like some combined density. You will see every little ripple. They're so thick and forming blobs. You don't want that. Also, this takes much longer to render. Then a little thing about splitting. Usually you want to do that for performance and to work easier with that. By splitting, I mean really having different objects per landmark, basically. Here on the fox, I split the face, the cheeks, the ears, the inner and outer part, the neck, the body, the tail, and the feet into different objects, just so I have an easier time working on it, and my computer is not going to die while doing that. As fur work still is very taxing on performance, even though it got a lot better thanks to the hair curves. You still want to split them during working. You get one downside, because you don't have them in one object. You have to take special care to make the parts where the different objects meet properly. It will take a little bit of cleanup and making sure the density is right and not clipping, but it's generally not a lot of work. You could also, once you are done, join the whole object together. This is possible in GeoNodes. Just add a join and put in all the different fur objects you have and get a big one out of it again. But yeah, then you have to deal with the performance. If it works, it's probably the best because then you will have the most even look. But how do we even control what's going on? We do that with masks. It can be either vertex groups or textures. The positive thing about vertex groups is they are super fast to set up. You just add a group and do some weight painting. And the good thing about textures is you can get way more detail, especially if you have a lower model. Of course, you are limited by the vertex with a vertex group, and the texture can cover that. What do we control with masks? Well, everything we add procedurally. That is the density, which is created by the child particles, but also modifiers like noise, trim, and clump. Here a little look at what they are doing. Clump is creating little clumps of fur. So it's basically all the children next to a guide will meet at the top of the guide. Trim will just alter the length of the curves. You can do that as a general, just decide on the length, but what I do a lot and is also crucial for realism is to add some randomness. If you have just a little bit of randomness in the length of the hair, it will look a lot more realistic. I will show you that later. Then, two of the other very important procedural methods are noises. We have two types. We have the general noise that will be applied over the whole hair groom. As you can see, it's like adding a noise texture on top of the whole thing. Then we have frizz, and this is adding randomness to the per vertex count of the hair. So every hair will get a little bit random on its own, and this is also super important for realism. Like, first you get the hair groom, put everything in the right direction, and then you get in that individually, that look with the modifiers. So let's jump into Blender now. I have my fox model here, and I will just start by adding some empty hair. Now nothing appears because it's a completely empty setup. And if I go to the add brush, I can add hairs. And those hairs are, by standard, very, very long. You can adjust them here at the curve shape. I probably go with 0.01. Oh, that's a bit short, but it's better. Let me turn on symmetry and add some hair. That's how you would start. You can also have them generated on the whole mesh beforehand, or just go in and do it by hand. I like to do it by hand because I don't think it makes much difference. And then you would go with the comb brush and start to work on that hair groom. And as you can see, those hair like to move a lot when being groomed. Let me make them a little bit longer so you see more how they behave. You see how they are shaped. Like they really are curved, and there's a little bit of a drag when you pull on them. This is because they have 8 points per curve. And all of those points can be edited with your comb brush. And this is usually way too much when you start out. You will have the problem of those hairs getting tangled up and clipping into each other, or even worse, clipping into the mesh, and it's a pain to work like that. They will always do something you don't want them to do. So I recommend to not start like that, but turn down that point count to 2. If you start with only 2 points, like maybe I show it to you here on the eye, because that's usually a complicated part to work on. With just 2 points, they move very straight, because that's all they can do. If we go into edit mode, you see it's just 2 points. They cannot move in between anymore. They will always be like this, and they are much easier to control like that. I do my entire hair grooms with only 2 points on the guides until I got all those fur directions where I want them, and it looks generally nice, and then I will slowly start to increase those point counts. And only if it's really long hair I go to 8. I think 8 is quite a high density point count, and it's not necessary to go that much higher. If I just add 1 more, I already can create nice curves, especially for a shorter fur. This is all we need. Oh, this one disappeared down. But yeah, that's how I would start and keep it simple for a very long time until I'm really sure I want to move up and just work on the details anymore. So now these are just the guides. Let's add some children to them. We use the interpolate here for that. If I can get it to attach, I have to select the mesh, and you can see those hairs just appeared everywhere. This is because the interpolation will take the entire mesh and tries to add the hair there. It will follow the guides, but only where it's close to a guide. If there are no guides, it will do whatever it does here. So the children particles always should be close to a guide, and that's why I told you before to keep those even spaced, not have bald spots in between, so the guides can really make sure the children are not going astray. Also, the density you see here, I think it's hair per square meter, if I'm right about that. So don't be surprised if you need to really increase that density count by a lot to get a dense mesh. So I hope that's not crashing my laptop here. Yeah, my laptop is also tired. It's the second day of Blender conference. Everyone partied last night. Maybe. But here you can see this. Oh, yeah, that was a bit too much. Let's go down to fan. There we already have a bald spot, a very horrible one, because there are no guides. Here those guides are just, yeah. But on the eye, it's actually already looking okay-ish, I'd say. Now, how do we make sure those children grow on the right side? We make a vertex group for that. And before I do that, I just turn off the interpolate children again for performance reasons. Now, this is very easy. Just go into weight paint and paint the weights where you want the hair to grow. Like here, I'm making a mask and maybe the cheeks. And if I go back and turn on again the interpolate hair curves, it will not work because first we have to add the density mask, and it was called group. Was it called group like that? Yeah. And you see it's now only growing where I masked the density. And that's how you control basically anything I have on this model. Let me see. I usually add the suffix fur, and that's all the different vertex groups I created. Like I have the tail, the body, the head, and the neck, like the general densities. But I also have a vertex group to control the noise, the clump, the length, and additional clump and densities. It just happens sometimes you really stack a lot of modifiers onto each other and you want to stay in control of them as much as possible. Of course, you could also do texture masks for all of that. So, what do we next? Maybe we add a few more around the cheeks and make those cheeks a little bit longer. Yeah, now we have this really wonderful looking cheeks. Maybe a bit like the animals from Madagascar had a style like that. Now, where is it? The trim hair curves. Let's just make that immediately more realistic. Turn off replace length. And just add in a little bit of random offset. Oh, that's not a little bit. That's a little bit. And now, do you see the difference? Like, immediately it looks a lot more realistic, better, without even adding some noise. It's just, the length difference makes so much. But if you mix that together with shorter fur, you can already see that here some of those guides are already disappearing. They got too small. That's why you also want the trim hair curves to be controlled by a group. Otherwise, at these places, you will just get bald spots. But we keep on working on those cheeks. Let's add next the clumps. This also looks wonderful once you add it. Like, yeah. Another one of those things you want to control with a group. Group. Call it clump. I cannot write. And go into vertex paint. No, not vertex paint, weight paint. And now we only do that here at the cheeks, because that's where I want a little bit of clumping. Now we add that to the vector. Like on every node you can add it somewhere. In the interpolate it's the density mask, here it's the vector. Also it's a bit big. In that case, it's missing some guides. There's almost no guides. It's very small. So I have one guide. That's a bit, yeah, let's turn off the trim. And with the density brush, if you turn on all those interpolate settings, you can very fast add density without needing to place every single one by hand. Now, if we turn on the children again, you also see, because we have more guides, we also have smaller clumps. Together with the trim, the clumps definitely need a little bit of extra work. They usually look a bit too crazy. With the tip spread, you can give them like a little bit of frizz. That's like an endpoint roughness. And they also have some additional settings with offset. You can move them a little bit randomly. It really depends on what you're going for, how big your clumps are. You probably want to experiment with the clump a lot, but as a general rule, most animals have clumped fur. On some parts it's more visible, but on others it's just a tiny little bit. The hairs are never straight or perfectly straight. There's always a little bit of clump, there's always a little bit of noise, and also, of course, a little bit of length difference. Now let's turn off the clump and add in the frizz, which is also something I very much like, and it always looks like that too. Like every modifier, once you add them, you get a wonderful picture to send to your team. Just reduce that a little bit. And you see there's already a lot of difference. Maybe again, enough for the cheeks, but way too much here. So this also needs to be masked. But in general, that's how I would go for an entire hair groom. I split the parts, put in the guides, and then slowly build up those modifiers. Also, if you need more modifiers, because you have so many little different parts, like around the eyes you need a different value, around the nose, around the cheeks, add them. Just add a lot of vertex groups or texture masks and control that. It's not going to change a lot in performance, and you will need that control. Yeah, so that would have been the general part. Now, let's go back to the slides and talk about the most common things that will happen when you work on fur. Like already said, the bald spots happen a lot when there is uneven density, your density is too low, but also when you have deformations. When the rig is deforming the mesh underneath, the curves have to follow, and if the deformation is creating really sharp angles or something is clipping, the fur will also do exactly that. I always like to say it's something like a bit of a multiplier. If your mesh looks, the deformation looks too harsh, the hair will look like 10 times worse. Especially the longer the hair is, the more you will see those little problems occurring. So you want to keep the topology, and especially once you animate it, really smooth. Another very common problem is hair growing where you don't want it to grow. Example on the inside of the mouth, because the mouth mesh is very thin, and you use the density brush there to add a lot of new curves, and suddenly you have the hair growing inside. sticking through the tongue and the teeth, and you're just like, oh, not again. I always say, don't fight the system. It works in a very predictable way. And to avoid that, I just split up the model. I take away the inside of the mouth, just go to separate, select the inside, separate by selection, and don't deal with it. If there is no mesh they can attach to, they won't attach to that mesh anymore. It's just, I don't have the time to fight those curves. Also, if a curve for some reason just won't go in the right direction when you comb it, delete it, add a new one. It's not worth the hassle to fight those hairs. Then a second thing that used to throw me off a few times is length inconsistency. At my slow leopard, I had this little dent at the mouth, and first I thought like, maybe it's the texture, maybe I have a black spot there. But after looking at it, I realized, oh, there's just a spot where the fur is much shorter, and that's a shadow. When using the grow and shrink brush, you have to keep aware you might not catch every curve. And then these spots happen. Also, generally, if there is a strong change of length, it will look weird. You always try to keep the length change also very consistent. Similar to the density, you don't want to change very abruptly. And of course, you could just say, I'm not going to use any of the grow and shrink brushes and do everything by masking. But I found that also to be very tedious at the head, because most animals at the head have a lot of different hair lengths. Then there is the fun thing of stray hair and the surface deform. The surface deform node is what will make the hair move. So if an armature is animating the mesh, the surface deform will take care that all the guides are following the mesh. And if the guides follow, the children follow. But as I said in the beginning, the hair curves bind to UV space. And if there is something wrong with your UV space, it tells you that. It's called the invalid surface UVs. In this case, it's on 323 different curves. So that means at least 323 little hairs are not doing what they're supposed to be doing. The most common issue is some of your UVs are overlapping. You cannot have that if you use the hair curves. You have to have every UV on its own separate space. You cannot stack them, because then the hairs cannot attach. So absolutely no stacking, but it is okay to use UDIMs. There's no problem with that. Just every point of the UV map needs its own space. I, for example, like to lay out my UVs like this and flip them in the middle. For that, I usually use the mirror modifier and check on flip UDIMs and mirror to the side. And it doesn't happen always, but sometimes the middle line is not merged properly. And if that happens, you cannot see it. You think, oh, there is no overlap in my UVs. Why is it creating broken guides? Well, this is easy to fix. There is a function in the UV editor that is called merge by distance. You probably know that from modeling. You just use that and make sure those UVs are probably sewn together at the middle. Then, as a little extra, If you do not get a finished mesh to work on, like I usually still do some little edits, and you change the underlying topology, the curves will not get invalid because the UV space is still intact, but they will float or be inside. And this is also quite easy to fix by just using snap to nearest surface. This is in the sculpt mode, a function, and it usually works like 99%, it works fine. And if there are curves that have not properly snapped, just as I said, don't fight the system, delete them. Okay, I have prepared a few of those. Common problems where we will see that. Here we have the ear, and there already are some bald spots. This one here is created by not having a guide. I hope this is good visible. If I add a guide here, it's no longer a bald spot, but that guide is not interpolating. Always make sure you interpolate correctly. And then I can add a little guide here, and maybe one more. And this might seem a little bit tedious, but it gets pretty fast. With time, you just see where there are spots you want to add more, and just slowly build it up where you need it. Here on the other side, if I add one more, nothing is happening. Like, something happened, it added a guide, but that guide is inside the mesh. Wonderful. This usually happens because here it's so thin and it's interpolating more to the guides up than the guides down here, and it tries to stick in the same direction. You can try to get them out with the puff brush, but funnily it works well in this case, but sometimes it does not work too well. Also, combing can be pretty hard here. So this is also one of those cases where you just have to do a little bit work by hand, make sure there is nothing hiding and nothing disappearing in the mesh, and just add in those curves evenly. Also, if you try to get a certain direction beforehand, like let's say you want to have the first fan out at this point here, you can just deselect all, and if you add a new curve, it will be the only one that is selected by default, and you can groom that in a direction. And now if I deselect again and add another one, I can also do that. And do that again. Oh, I forgot to deselect. And once there are already a few curves here, the following curves will interpolate better between them. That's how you can make pretty fast the change in fur direction. Now we look at the fur growing inside. Here we just use the density brush to get some density on the mouth. And if I turn on pose mode, I usually keep it here in a little pinned window so I can switch between it fast. We already see that some curves are growing here, and if I increase the size, this will maybe a little bit more density, get even worse. Like those curves, yeah, I don't want them here, but I want to add a lot of density really fast at this area, and this will always cause them to grow inside. So just select that and make separate by selection, and now those curves can no longer grow inside, but of course they are still here. They just broke because of course they don't have any space anymore, and we already have the invalid surface UVs. This will also happen if you change topology while already having a hair groom, and you need to either snap them to the surface or delete them, but you cannot have them on invalid surfaces because they will simply not move. They will just stay in place, and once you animate it, it will look really funky. Like I have this here. As you can see, this also has invalid surface UVs. And if I add post position, the error is here. Those hairs just don't move. And if I go to the UV editor, I will see, oh, not this, here, that obviously the problem needs to be here. And there we have it, UVs overlapping. If I get them somewhere where they're no longer overlapping, you already see the fur has moved into the right position, and if we still have some invalid ones, but those here are fixed. I would need to look more into it. It's basically just, it will be around the place where you place them. You get a message. If you try to place a guide on an invalid UV island, it will just not appear there, and you will get a little message below there, it's invalid. Yeah. Then let's just look very fast at the length inconsistency we talked about. Here I made it also very extreme so you can see it. Let's hope the render works. Yes. Like you see, I hope, that the shadowing, of course, gets much stronger and will really emphasize the places where the length is inconsistent. But there is actually a really good fix for that, and it's the density brush. If you did just delete them here, where there is that inconsistency, and use the density brush to add them again, oh well, it should interpolate quite well, but we have something weird going on here. But usually this is how I would go to basically smooth out areas like that. It will happen. Oh, here you see why. So many broken ones. So if you work with the grow and shrink brush, it will happen that you get a little bit of inconsistency. Then you can really just go with the density brush and add in more density, or yeah. It's like sculpting. It's a bit back and forth, trying to get the shape, but you also have those wonderful tools here to help you. You don't have to fight it. Delete them, add new ones, until you are satisfied with the look. I think this is not very nicely done, but it should be at least a bit better in terms of the shading. Yeah. As said, it takes time. I'm not going to make a beautiful hair groom here. Now, as the next point, in case you need it, it's very easy to make something like a shape key with the hair system in GeoNodes, and it's just this little network you need for that. Let's do this. For this, we just add in that pre-made fur. Oh, wonderful, this does not work. There is something broken. Fascinating. Okay, then I have to set it up myself very fast. Not so nice. Why is this not working? Okay. So this is the first object, and now imagine I want to make something like a wet look. I would just go into sculpt mode and sculpt this very fast. And now jump into GeoNodes. Add a new GeoNode system. Why is this pinned? No. And we basically just want to move smoothly between those two. For that, we need a set position, a vector mix, and we need the general position of the mesh. And if I add that to 1, and add this into position, you see at 1 I have the mesh here, and here it disappears because now everything is set to 0. Now we just put in the second object. We also need a position for that, and we need an index node, like read the index, and a sample index. Because we are going through the indexes, we sampled the position from the other object and make sure it's a vector and add it to B. And now we can just switch between them like a shape key. You can add a driver to this vector, use a custom property to drive a few of them, and you basically have a shape key. And it also behaves just like a shape key, because if you add one more curve now, just like with a shape key, why can't I add another curve? Weird things happening here, but just generally, if you add one more curve here, it usually breaks because you're changing the indexes, and then of course it can no longer calculate properly. And as I see, I think we are out of time. Okay. I would have still had a little bit about shading, but, well, thank you.